Fully 20% of Ukraine's 44 million people have been displaced as a result of the war. Millions have fled to neighboring countries and beyond. Rema Jamous is the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees representative to Canada, and she joins us now from the nation's capital for more. Rema, thanks for making time for us on TVO tonight. How are you doing?
I'm well, Steve. Thank you very much for having me.
Not at all. Please get comfortable for a moment because we want to put some background in place just to start off. And Sheldon, if you would, let's bring these graphics up and we'll give people the background they need to better understand this story. This is truly a refugee crisis. More than 3.4 million refugees have fled Ukraine since Russia invaded in late February. Where are they going? Well, Poland has taken in more than 2 million refugees. That's more than 5% of their population. Romania, more than 535,000. Moldova, more than 365,000. Hungary, more than 312,000. And Slovakia, more than 250,000. 75% of those arriving are women and children, as men 18 to 60 can't leave and are engaged in the fight. More than 1 million could be displaced within their own country. The Government of Canada, for its part, has promised to welcome a quote-unquote unlimited number of Ukrainians to Canada on a temporary basis. They'll be able to live and work here for up to 3 years, and the government has waived many requirements and fees. And just so people get a sense of the territory we're talking about here, let's bring up a map of Ukraine, and you'll better be able to see, and for those who are listening on podcast, we'll just describe that refugees are fleeing to the west, immediately west. That's Poland, Slovakia, Hungary, Romania. And Russians, of course, are attacking from the north, the south, and the east. And from the Department of A picture is certainly worth 1,000 words. Earlier this month, Ukrainian refugees fleeing after a Russian airstrike in Irpin downed a bridge. And look at that. Look at that poor woman trying to escape the enormous challenges of her life right now. And Rema, with all of this now on the record, let me bring you in here. The last time I suspect we saw anything close to this was 30 years ago in the Balkans as Yugoslavia was falling apart. I just wonder if you could compare what's happening today to that.
Well, indeed, Steve, what we're seeing is massive displacement, both within the borders of Ukraine, but also across borders into neighboring countries. You referenced a figure of over 3.4 million. We're now actually edging closer to 3.5 million, and I suspect by day's end we'll get there. Massive amounts. The number as well in recent days, the proportion rather of women and children has now climbed to 90%. So we know they're leaving behind their fathers, their sons, loved ones, and they're trying to seek refuge and safety across borders. Now, what we've seen as well, which is deeply troubling, is that the numbers of children who are showing up at these borders unaccompanied and separated from families has also been growing, which presents a whole other host of challenges, because we know that during times of crisis like this, in an emergency situation, that's when the risks really soar for children and indeed women to be preyed on and become victims of gender-based violence, trafficking, exploitation, and abuse. And, just to speak for a moment about the capacity required on the part of the neighboring countries, which have commendably kept borders open and allowed people to flee the violence and the insecurity. But it's stretching limits, stretching resources rather to the absolute limit, and they need all the support that they can get right now.
Can you just help us understand how a 10-year-old who is fleeing for his or her life by him or herself, how do they begin to survive?
Well, thankfully, we now have, at all border points, we have colleagues who specialize in dealing with precisely these kinds of scenarios, who immediately work with the authorities to register and identify these children, to try and put them in emergency foster care, link them to the national systems of the country to which they've fled, but also to undertake the immediate task of family tracing and trying to unify or reunify, rather, all of those children with family members or caregivers or guardians, whatever the case may be. So we have staff in place that are trained for exactly this kind of scenario.
Sheldon, if you would, let's bring up picture number 4 now. And Rema, I'll ask you, since we've already heard a huge percentage of the people fleeing are women and children right now, what are they able to take with them? how does this work?
Well, oftentimes, I mean, we all watch this dramatic situation play out in real time. We were hoping for the best, but planning for the worst. And oftentimes, what you find in these situations is there's a just people are completely hoping on to hope against hope, hanging on to that hope rather, and in disbelief that they may actually have to flee at a moment's notice. But often that's what happens. You run with very little, and the safety of your family is foremost in your mind. What also concerns me now, Steve, is you have millions of people seeking refuge and safety across borders, but many millions more who are trapped within conflict affected areas. We at the moment estimate that up to 13 million people are actually going to be in need of humanitarian assistance, some of them more urgently than others. We're seeing chronic, now I can call it chronic because we've been weeks into this situation, but also potentially fatal shortages of basic necessities of life like water, food, medicine. So the humanitarian needs in country are also mounting, and that's presenting a whole other host of concerns and challenges to all the humanitarian responders on the ground right now.
Let's show a couple of more pictures here, again, to bring this story home. Sheldon, if we can, pictures on page 5. This is an elderly woman with her daughter who has found refuge in a Polish school, which has been turned, as we can see, into a kind of a makeshift shelter. And then, people are coming forward. There are donations of clothes and shoes and toys. Polish citizens have really stepped up. Maybe you could speak to that, Rema. How generous have Ukraine's neighbors been to this sea of humanity that has suddenly found itself in their countries?
Ukraine's neighbors, as I said, have deserve recognition for keeping those borders open and allowing people to continue to seek safety and refuge across borders. And this is something I should point out, Steve, that is not unique to the situation being played out in Europe right now. It's something we see in refugee crises around the world. People go where they can, and most of the times they're seeking safety and refuge across a border into a neighboring country. And they also remain in the neighboring countries because the goal is to ultimately return home. But you've seen a tremendous and profound outpouring of support from everyday, ordinary citizens in Europe, but also across the world. We've seen that play out here in Canada as well, with individual Canadians and businesses stepping forward and contributing to the humanitarian relief efforts and showing concrete expressions of that human solidarity that we need right now.
We are not seeing, in other refugee crises, you see camps, you see squalor, you see these kinds of things crop up to take care of the need. We're not seeing much of that right now. And I wonder if that's because these refugees are being welcomed into people's homes. How much of that is happening?
Well, indeed, we're seeing some of that, but we're also seeing that in these first mass movements of people, many of them will have family links or contacts in neighboring countries or further afield. And we also know that those who leave in the first waves tend to be the most able to do so and the best resourced to be able to do that. Europe has also extended a form of temporary protection to those fleeing Ukraine. It's something that foresees a mass movement of this sort, which allows European countries to provide immediate legal status to those who are coming across the border so that they can access essential services like education or healthcare, and also not to be concerned about legal status in the country. So these kinds of measures are going to be the things that prevent what you describe, that kind of squalor and that camp type setting. They're well resourced and well equipped with support, of course, to be able to manage these flows. And so far, we're seeing that that's being done in a really, really positive way.
How many colleagues do you have on the ground there, and do you know whether they are in any danger?
We have a longstanding presence in the country, Steve, and in the region. Within Ukraine, we have at this point 115 colleagues who are on the ground from the UN Refugee Agency, alongside many other UN agencies and humanitarian partners on the ground. These colleagues, especially in the earliest moments, were like ordinary Ukrainians, sheltering underground and subjected to severe movement restrictions. And we have made the clear and unequivocal call that safe passage, there has to be a cessation in the violence. There has to be a silencing of the guns so that our colleagues can access the stockpiles of emergency items that we had pre-positioned in country, and anticipating, unfortunately, that we might find ourselves in this point. But they also need to be able to reach the people who need those supplies right now the most. So our colleagues are there, they're staying and they're delivering, but of course at great risk to themselves as well.
Have you lost anybody yet?
No, thankfully, that hasn't happened yet. We know that humanitarians, unfortunately, are targeted around the world in similar situations, and that colleagues often do lose their lives in the line of duty. But thankfully, we haven't reached that point here.
Good. You have heard the offer that Canada has made. They have foregone a lot of the restrictions that many new people to this country have to go through in order to attend to this crisis. Do you know whether many Ukrainians so far are taking the government of Canada up on its offer?
Well, so far we're seeing reports of people arriving in Canada. I think we've well now exceeded several thousand, some of whom predate the introduction of these measures and were here beforehand and unable to return home. But these measures, Steve, I have to say, any kind of relief that provides ordinary Ukrainians who are fleeing the violence and the persecution right now, whether across borders, as we said, or further afield to countries like Canada, these are welcome initiatives because that protection needs to be swift, it needs to be immediate, and it's exactly what we need in a moment like this.
What else would you like to see the government of Canada put forward?
Well, the government of Canada has generously supported the humanitarian relief efforts. They did so early and quite swiftly. What we need from the government of Canada is the same thing we've been asking for governments around the world to support us with, and that's to ensure that, once, unfortunately, this situation, if there is no diplomatic solution and we don't see an end to this crisis soon and it becomes protracted, what we need is for people to stay the course, governments to provide sustained support. Because right now we have, as I said earlier, profound expressions of solidarity and support from around the world. But as this situation drags on, and I certainly hope that's not going to be the fate of Ukraine or Ukrainians here, but if that does happen, we will need them to stay the course and to continue to provide that important support to humanitarian actors on the ground.
Rema, this is a bit of a tricky question, but I'd like you to weigh in anyway. And it's, let me put it this way. On the one hand, you want to save people. You want people to be able to get out safely. You want them to be able to wait out this crisis somewhere and then potentially return after this thing is over. The reality is many people who will leave are not going to come back. And the political question then becomes, are you giving Putin a kind of a victory by reducing the size of the population of Ukraine in this way? How do you make sense of that conundrum?
Well, it's certainly something we think about with all refugee situations around the world. And it's no coincidence, Steve, that the overwhelming majority, something in the order of 86% of refugees who are fleeing violence and persecution, stay in neighboring countries. They stay close to home because that's where they want to return. I have to hope that with the unity of purpose and the action that has been taken on the part of the international community, that we will see a diplomatic resolution to this problem and Ukrainians will be able to return to their country. But that requires a concerted effort on the part of the international community. And I think that has to be the number one objective right now, because humanitarian solutions to these kinds of problems are not sustainable and they are not a substitute for meaningful political action.
It wasn't that long ago, maybe 7 months ago, that this country was promising to help people leave Afghanistan safely. And I think the government promised 40,000, that it would accommodate 40,000. And I gather fewer than 9,000 Afghans have now arrived. Do you think we've forgotten about those people as we now focus our attention on Eastern Europe?
Well, this is indeed a preoccupation for all of us at the moment, is that while the spotlight is rightly on Ukraine because of the devastation and the trauma that they're living through right now, we can't forget that even before this crisis, we had 82 million people suffering the effects of forced displacement around the world. We have people who have seen misery in the wake of conflict and persecution on just about every continent or corner of this planet. So we can't take our eyes off of them. And certainly Afghanistan is one very real example. Just a few short months ago, Steve, we issued another call to the international community, we meaning the United Nations, asking for the single largest amount of humanitarian support we've ever had to put out there for any country. And we said at that time that the scale of the ask on the part of the UN and humanitarian actors really reflected the scale of despair. And I'm really, unfortunately, in a position where I have to say the situation has only become more dire and more desperate. Over half of the population in Afghanistan relies on humanitarian aid to survive. And within the borders of Afghanistan, you have the highest levels of emergency food insecurity. That's just below full-fledged famine than any other country in the world right now. So it's important that while the spotlight remains on Ukraine, we cannot forget about the other emergencies that require sustained support and solidarity.
Rema, just in our last minute here, does the Human Rights Commission think that this is actually going to get worse before it gets better?
Well, if you're referring to my agency, which is the Commission
For refugees,
for
yes.
refugees rather than human rights, we're all colleagues, and certainly our work is very much linked. If we're going to go based on the contingency planning and the forecast that we're working with, based on what we're seeing on the ground, unfortunately, we will see the situation deteriorate even further if we don't have that kind of unified political action on the part of the international community to deal with the root causes of this crisis and find a meaningful solution.
That's Rema Jamous, the UNHCR's representative to Canada. We are grateful for your time on TVO tonight, and naturally, we wish you well in your efforts to make some progress in this horrendous situation. Thank you so much, Rema.
Thank you, Steve.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.